Speaking of,
How many of you are familiar with the song Let's Talk About Sex by the band Salt and Pepper? Anybody? Okay, a couple of you. Well, if you are, you know that the lyrics to that song express an openness and a frankness when it comes to talking about human sexuality. This is a policy that should be part of every sex education program for teenagers today. Adolescents in the United States nowadays have more options than ever when it comes to learning about sex. But perhaps one program that you are not familiar with is the new trend of asking questions and receiving answers about sex via text messages. This trend is sweeping across the United States through programs such as Hooked Up in California and the Sex Ed Loop in Chicago. Now, I know what you all are thinking. We're not teenagers anymore, Gwen, so why should we care about this? Well, how many of you have younger relatives? I do. Friends still in high school? The information that they have about sex largely affects the decisions they make about it. That's what did it for me. I have 3 teenage nieces, and I'm not ready to become a great aunt before the age of 30. So when I read about this article on the New York Times, I knew I had to do more research about it. Since I'm relatively close to the target age of most of these programs, I was able to gauge their effectiveness based on the research I did and my own experiences. I discovered that text-based information services are not only helpful, but the best mode of sex education for teenagers today. In my speech, I will lay out why traditional modes, such as family, school, and the internet, are inherently flawed, and what makes text-based information services better than the rest of them. Now, how many of you have experienced or seen that awkward moment when a parent takes their child, sits them down, and tries to have a conversation about the birds and the bees? As many of you know, these talks rarely go well. Well, why is that? Christopher Daddis, in a study in the Journal of Adolescence, which was reported in the New York Times on June 11, 2011 by Pamela Paul, tried to answer this question. He found that many teenagers have a difficult time talking to their parents about sex because they consider that information outside their parents' sphere of the need to know. Because of this, a good dialogue cannot take place between a parent and a child, and thus no education can take place. However, this isn't the only problem with parents as a source for information about sex. A study done by Marla Eisenberg and her associates in the March 2004 journal Perspectives on Sexual Health and Sexual and Reproductive Health found that less than half of the parents they interviewed in Wisconsin and Minnesota had accurate ideas about contraceptives and STDs. Well, this is a major problem. If parents don't have up-to-date information, how can they pass on accurate information to their kids? Now, if you think families are a bad choice of information about sex, schools are absolutely nothing better. The worst part about schools is simply that it's really awkward to have a conversation about sex with a bunch of teenagers. John Hoffman reported in the December 30th, 2011 New York Times a quote by a student, Stephanie Cisnero. She said that it was hard for her to learn about sex in an academic environment because she often felt that she was being judged for the questions that she was asking. Well, Francis Bacon once said, "Who questions much shall learn much and retain much." My question is, do classrooms really encourage this? I don't think so. If kids are too scared to speak up and ask a question when they don't understand something, how can they learn? In addition to this problem, like families, schools are not always providing accurate information about sex. You can see here I have the famous quote from Mean Girls, "Don't have sex because you will get pregnant and die." Although Mean Girls is a work of fiction, unfortunately the scenario is playing out in classrooms across America. The Guttmacher Institute, on their website, reported a study called Facts on American Teen Sources of Information About Sex. This study said that as of October 2011, only 13 states in the United States required that medically accurate information about sex be taught in classrooms. Okay, so we've talked about why families and schools are bad sources of information about sex. But what about the internet? Of course, like both of these methods, the information given on the internet is not always medically up to date. But along with this problem is also the issue of you never know what you're going to get when you type the word sex into a search engine. As you can see here, I've provided an illustration of that example. This cartoon says, "So I Googled the facts of life like you told me to, and some weird 80s sitcom came up. Another lame attempt at avoiding the talk." This is a pretty innocent incident of this occurring, but it also goes to show that the information that you get from a search engine might not always be appropriate to the topic that you're researching. So what questions and receive answers without ever having to have the awkwardness of a face-to-face conversation. In addition, it's also content controlled. Many of these services are run by reputable organizations such as Planned Parenthood. And finally, it also works to a method that is familiar to many teens. The December 29th, 2011 edition of the Daily Caller reported that 3/4 of teenagers in America have cell phones. And of those 3/4, 87% of them have texting. So this is a method that is familiar to the majority of American teens, and they have access to it. In my speech, I have told you about why traditional methods of sex education are ineffective, how their awkwardness prevents good conversations from happening, and how many of them do not have medically accurate information about sex. In addition, I've also told you how texting is able to overcome these issues by being anonymous and content controlled. Based on this information, we can conclude that text-based information services about sex are the best method of sex education for teenagers today. So, in the spirit of Salt and Pepper's song, perhaps we should start singing Let's Text About Sex instead.